For every 10 people that tries to get lean, only 2 will succeed. But here's the crazy part. Out of those 2 people, only 1 of them will stay lean, and the other will put it all back on. So what's this guy's secret? For most people, they rely on quick fixes, and eventually it falls apart. So after studying the research, learning from top coaches, working with thousands of people over the last decade, I've brought it down to these 5 daily habits that will keep you in the best shape in your life. I got myself down to nearly 11% body fat by following these 5 daily habits that are super simple to implement. So here's how you do it. Number 1 is eating the right amount. As I highlighted here, amount is key. You thought I would say making sure you're on the right calorie deficit, but a lot of people mess up when they don't have the right amount of food. So what would that look like? That might sound music to your ears because you think to yourself, I can eat more food. Carlo has said, I eat more food, I can then lose fat and be the leanest. And yes, that is what I'm saying. If you are able to eat the right food, so let's say, for example, you're having any protein you want, so steak, you're having salmon, you're having eggs, and you're having large quantities of those, you are going to feel very good. You're going to feel satiated, you're going to get the right nutrients into your body, and you're going to be eating a large amount of food. With that being said, that is going to stop you having those cravings of eating junk and processed food on top of that, because then what happens is you then will end up eating less calories in the full day because you are eating the right amount of food. Whereas a lot of people end up aiming for 1,500 calories, they're under calories, yes, they're on a deficit, but they feel terrible and they end up messing up in a 14-day cycle or even 7 days. They end up messing up terribly in one of those days because they're not eating enough of the right food. Key word is right food, not just enough food, the right food. Keep in mind, out of these 5 habits, you might only start with one of those habits. Starting with that is going to make a massive difference as you're going to then able to implement it as opposed to doing all 5 at the same time and you end up not actually achieving any. So you might optimize by doing 5. If you can do that, amazing. But if you are starting off and this is overwhelming, as you go through these, then pick one of them and then each week maybe add another at a time. That takes us on to number 2. Number 2 is keeping track of your nutrition. That is going to be massive. Then keeping track of your training and then also keeping track of your movement. These may seem like, oh, that's going to be very confusing, but if you just focus simply on the simplistic part of nutrition, training, and lifestyle, such as nutrition, you just need to make sure you keep track that you are having enough protein and animal protein, as an example, per day of, let's say, 100 to 110 grams of protein for a woman, 120 to 150 or 60 for a man. If you start off as that basis, you're going to be really ahead of the game. That would be a very basic track, and probably the most important tracker of nutrition is your protein levels. As I had mentioned before, your fat levels are important as well. So making sure your fats are high enough, not just having chicken, white fish, etc. You're having those, fattier meats because those are excellent for your fat loss journey, and you need to keep track of those as you go. That would be number 1. Number 2 would be your training. Making sure you're getting, say, 3 heavy resistance training sessions in a week. That would be making sure you're tracking those. If you do Monday, Wednesday, and then you don't get Friday in and you mess up, then just do it on the Saturday. But making sure those 3 heavy resistance training sessions are done per week as a minimum is super important for your fat loss journey in combination with your nutrition. So if you want to enhance that as well, you could potentially chuck in some high intensity interval training into that week to give you a 4-session a week working week. Okay, that would be a great week. So to clarify, nutrition, 100 to 110 grams of protein for a woman, 120 to 160 for a man, making sure you're training 3 resistance training sessions and 1 high intensity cardio a day, And lastly, on the lifestyle, making sure that you have your movement done per day. Doing a standard 10,000 steps is universal known to make sure that everybody gets that movement done per day. It's easy to track and it's important, as you're then going to feel far better. I have read studies to show that actually helps with how you feel in terms of hunger when you're moving more often, because you don't normally get hungry when your heart rate is up a little bit. You mostly get hungry when you're sitting static and not moving, which I'm sure many can relate to. Number 3 is sleep quality, and I enhance your quality. Keep in mind, and this is something a lot of people don't know, is it's not how long you sleep, it is also when you sleep. Because if you sleep, for example, at 12 at midnight and you wake up at, say, 7 a.m., you have had 7 hours of sleep. And you may think that's not bad. Let's say, for example, you sleep at 9 p.m. and you wake up at 4 a.m., you're going to feel far more recovered with the same amount of sleep than you did for the 12 to 7. And that is super important to understand, because when you sleep earlier due to your circadian rhythm, you then have a deeper sleep when it's earlier in the night compared to sleeping later in the night. And I have read studies to show that sleeping super late at night can actually be the equivalent of drinking alcohol when you don't sleep early enough, which is crazy to think. So when you are on a fat loss journey, if you are doing number 1 and number 2, and you don't incorporate number 3, you're going to find it really hard to implement 1 and 2. And also, it's not going to help you in the long term, and also you're going to then find it very, very difficult to implement these 2 points here if your sleep quality is not where it should be. Number 4 is build high quality meals. Building high quality. That is important when you are on this journey of fat loss, because you need to be aiming to make sure that you have, for example, the right protein levels per meal. But how do you then implement that into a day? What would that look like? Well, I would say starting off your day, if you're trying to build muscle and drop fat at the same time, we'd be making sure your first meal of the day has enough protein in it. What options could you have? You're having some eggs in the morning with a little bit of Greek yogurt would be an option. You can then mix that up in the afternoon. You can have something a little bit more of the fattier meats, such as your red meats in there. And then at nighttime, having maybe a leaner meat, such as a chicken, whitefish, or some prawns. So you're having 3 high quality protein sources per day. And this is extremely important for those people who have 2 types of people. That some people find it hard to eat enough, and people that sometimes overeat. Using example number 1 of people then find it hard to eat enough, eating your first meal of the day as early as possible gives you more time of the day to then have your second and third meal. If you wait too long to eat, you're going to find it harder to fit in those meals in the day and have a sufficient amount of protein. The second person who eats too much, you might be better off having 2 meals, because then you can then push later in the day those meals and have 2 larger meals, and then you have your last meal far closer to the end of the day, which stops your cravings in the night, as for most people, a lot of the cravings come in the evening. That is 2 examples. That is not every example, but that is 2 examples that could be relative to those who are watching. Making sure the high quality is in there, which means the meat quality that you're eating as well is super important. And you're not just having things that are protein-based, or they are in a processed high protein meals, because a lot of the supermarkets and things market high protein when the actual product itself is full of rubbish, full of different things and chemicals and preservatives that are not needed in the food to get you to your goal. Number 5 is set achievable goals. I have made this here achievable as super important to understand. When you set targets and goals, for a lot of people, they set unrealistic goals and they end up putting themselves off. They actually go backwards because they think to themselves with high expectations and low knowledge level, when you set high expectations and low knowledge, you end up in a situation where you give up over and over and over again, and you keep blaming yourself for the issue when it comes to not sticking to it. Yes, it's your responsibility to increase your knowledge, but at the same time, a lot of the issues are not you specifically that's giving up. It's because it's very hard not to give up when you're following things that are so difficult and are not actually the correct way of eating, training, lifestyle. And when those are incorrect, you're basically setting yourself up for disaster. So setting an achievable goal would be getting the basics of knowledge in terms of nutrition, training, and lifestyle, and setting a target, let's say, for example, someone who is a 65-kilo woman at, say, 5'4", would be easily be able to achieve in a 90-day process, dropping 6 kilos. That would look like about half a kilo a week, and that would help them gain muscle and drop fat. So you'll probably get that person dropping, say, 7 to 8 kilos of fat because they're increasing muscle, obviously, and they're going to be left with an amazing body composition. This is perfect for a standard person who is ready to make that change, but for some people, it might be where they've coming from a really bad background, and you might need to give a shorter target for them, say, for example, a 4-kilogram loss or a 3-kilogram loss, because it depends on the person. So if you're sitting there to yourself and you think to yourself, you know what, I'm not entirely sure what kind of knowledge basis I have, but I'm going to try and increase my knowledge over the next 90 days by watching, say, videos like this, but also at the same time, I'm going to try even just drop 1 kilo a month. This would be an amazing target, and anything above that is a bonus. Obviously, when people work with coaches like ourselves, we give higher targets because we're giving them the right blueprint to achieve that goal and the right support, community involved in it, which would make a massive difference to the speed of the results. So it depends on who is watching this. Apply it accordingly and don't be crazy with your targets. If you could relate to things in this video, click the link below if you're on YouTube, and if you're on Instagram, click the link in my bio and you can fill out that form.